welcoming your host, Marisa, the host of Be with Marisa Lee.
Hello, my name is Marisa. I'm the host of Be with Marisa Lee. Thank you for listening, if you did, to episode 1 of Ways of Coping with Anxiety. It's available on all streaming platforms or YouTube with subtitles and also transcribed if you want to just read something instead. I'm trying to figure out how I'd like to start each podcast episode, and I want to start by asking, how are you feeling today? And I'll also answer the question. I'm feeling really grateful that I get to hang out with friends that give me the space to be myself. And I think for so long, I was the one kind of putting up this wall, not sharing as much or telling myself certain things that stopped me from sharing. I think we all sort of have fear mechanisms that we'll do, or at least I do, just realizing that that space has always been there. So today's episode is about pretty much what this podcast will be about, which is interviewing women who are on their journey, whether it be their career or their hobby or anything that's on their journey, just talking about how mental health plays a role in everything and being aware of your mindset or your mind in general when you're going about working on projects or in the midst of hobbies, and just how your mind is through it all. And what I'm going to share today is all based on reflection that I've done within the past year, because when I was working on my clothing brand, I wasn't super aware of where my mind was at, my mental health space, but since taking a step back, I've been able to evaluate how my mental health was affected, and knowing that it was the best decision to take a step away from working on my clothing brand. So I'd want to start by talking about what the clothing brand is or was. It was a women's wear clothing brand, and I designed all the pieces from scratch. I wasn't buying wholesale and just putting a tag on it. I was designing the fit of everything and picking all the colors, choosing all the fabrics. Everything was a creation from my head. The message behind the brand was to accept the positive and negative in life. So I put design details onto each clothing, which was putting plus and minuses on the sleeves or somewhere at the bottom of the jacket, so it could remind you to accept the positive and negative of life. And I just wanted to put that reminder into clothing, because sometimes I feel like there's a disconnect of wholesomeness and fashion. I wanted to just connect the two in some way. The slogan of the brand was "You are your own original," which is also another reminder that I wanted to send to people, that they're their own original person. They're their own being, they're their own individual that makes their own choices, that creates their own style. Everything I did for the brand was, in a way, reminders that I wanted to give myself and also to other people. I tried my best to do that through the clothing that I created, the brand message, the content I created, everything that went into the clothing brand. So I will talk about the positives that happened over the 4 years of me growing my clothing brand. I started in June of 2014 up until about December 2019 is when I decided to take a step back, because I realized that my mental health wasn't in the right space, and we'll get to that. later on in the episode, but I wanted to start off by reflecting on the positive things, which was the fact that I made several pieces of clothing purely on my own and worked with factories to make my clothing and work with the people that make it and see the people that make it, design the tech packs, choose the fabrics. I think just now as I'm talking about it, I appreciate everything that I did to make this vision in my head come true. And I really do believe that learning comes from life, and this is the way that I wanted to teach myself as well as get experience, because I know in my heart or my soul that I'm meant to have some sort of business. I don't know if it's necessarily clothing, but even though I stopped my clothing brand, I still know deep down inside clearly that I'm meant to start some sort of business, and I want to help the people that are working for me or provide for them in some way, as well as for the product that I'm putting out for people. I just know deep down that that's the intention that I have with whatever I choose to start in the future. Some other positives from starting my clothing brand was I got to connect with so many people, which was super cool, and learn how to talk with people, whether it be in a business sense or just really gaining talking skills, which is priceless, I think, especially because I'm an introvert or just it's my personality type. But if I know I need to get something done, or if I have a clear vision in my head or anything like that, I know how to clearly communicate that to bring something to life. And I really value that in myself because I know that I'm capable to say the things that I need or want. And I think that's really valuable to be able to do that. Because sometimes, like what I said in the beginning of this episode, sometimes it's really ourselves that kind of stop ourselves from saying what we want or need. But it's just like kind of flicking that switch or turning it on, knowing that you're capable of saying what you need. Starting a pop-up shop, which was kind of towards the end of the span of my clothing brand, but it was really cool to organize that and just work with other local creatives that made clothes or jewelry or pottery. And it wasn't even just local people, it was all of the US. I had different vendors come in and I organized that pretty much by myself. I'd always wanted to own a little shop and sell handmade goods, so I could check that off of my bucket list, which is cool. I feel like I just have a lot of tips and I don't even know where to start with the tips, and that's why I wanted to ask you all that after this episode I'll mainly be talking about the mental health space, but if you want to email me or message me on Instagram, you can ask me specific questions. I could make a whole episode answering specific questions of just what it's like to grow a brand or having one or starting one. I think I'll need about 10 questions and I can make a whole episode answering your questions. I just learned so much. I just don't know where to start with it all. But I just realized that I really love connecting with people, especially on photo shoots, doing the creative direction. And that's even something that I've taken into doing now for my personal projects. I put a lot of effort and intention with photo shoots that I do now, organizing them and making sure everyone feels good and they're on the same page. Another thing that I learned is just how much it takes to make one piece of clothing. For my collections or just for my designs because I would design in batches. It would take over a year from sketching to getting the product. It would take at least a year and a half. And just knowing that whole process is something you can learn, but knowing the magnitude of what goes into it is something you can only learn through experience. So I wanted to talk about some of the hard parts because yes, it is very hard, but just because something's hard doesn't mean you don't do it or try. I nailed it down to 2 things that I thought were honestly the hardest for me and affected my mental health, which was managing the social media and motivation. And I actually want to start with motivation first because I have to say whenever you're starting something of your own or just whether it be a brand or anything where pretty much it's just you're the only one motivating yourself every day. I think it's nice to see feedback from people, and that's extra motivation. But at the end of the day, it's just you, and that gets hard sometimes because you're wearing so many different hats, juggling so many different parts of a business, where sometimes that cheerleader part is a little tired and can't give you the motivation for the day. Or if that happens, maybe that means it's just time to take a break from it all and give yourself a rest day. But I think you're very lucky if you have an outside motivation, whether it be like your partner, your friends, your following on social media, your family. I think it's all things to be really grateful for at any magnitude. And then that's where social media also gets hard because that's a place of comparison, and even though you may have that following, sometimes you'll think it's never enough or just keep comparing yourself to other brands where you don't see all the work that's going into everything that's being made. And the following that I was able to build for my brand was over 3,000 followers, which at the time I just kept telling myself it wasn't enough, and I kept thinking that was my source of motivation, telling myself that wasn't enough, but that's not a good source of motivation. That's just being hard on yourself. That just takes reflection now to realize that you just have to appreciate everything, whether it's not what you expected it to be with your goals. The most important thing is to enjoy every step. I just remember that I had set goals for myself, and sometimes those goals would come true, and then instantly your mind's thinking, what next? And then you just don't appreciate those goals. And when you're not appreciating the goals that you just achieved, how can you experience the journey that you're on? Which is a lot to think about because you're building something because you're ready for that journey and you're excited to take that journey for yourself. You're investing time in yourself, you're investing money, you're investing, a lot of time into an idea that you have. And I think the best thing that you could do is enjoy every moment of it. And that's what I just realized for myself towards the end was I wasn't enjoying any part of it. I knew I always loved fashion, and I just remember one day thinking, once I got the new product in that I had started designing over a year and a half ago, and it came in, and I just thought that it was such a burden to have to design more clothes again after that. And that was just crazy for me to think, because I love to design and I love clothing and I love fashion, and I've always known that it's a part of me and that I wanted to start a brand. And I'm thinking, why am I thinking it's a burden? Or, well, I wasn't even questioning why at the time. I think I just knew that I wasn't excited to design, and that really, I didn't even question it. Honestly, it just told me that I needed to take a break. I needed to take a step back. I think when you don't enjoy the process of any part of your business, I feel like that's an indicator to take a step away, look at everything you're doing, whether it be to take a big step away or take a break for the day or take a break for half the day. I think it's just an indicator of some sort of break, just to take a breath and look at everything. And my step away was all of last year, reflecting on my brand up until now and making this podcast. It was a super hard decision, but at the same time, I think it's one of those decisions where you know that it's purely for the well-being of yourself. And sometimes I think hard decisions are like that, and I think they're hard because you don't value yourself to make a decision like that, which is why it's hard. But throughout the year, I think just understanding this decision that I did make for myself helps me and motivates me to know the value of my mental health and the space that I can create for myself to process everything, taking that step away from my brand and giving myself that time to know what the next step is too, and maybe not even asking questions right away, but just really taking a break, because I was doing everything myself for my clothing brand. I think with anything that you love, there's the possibility of forgetting yourself. And I mean, there's other parts that, like small things that add up, like every day going onto Shopify and seeing the website views aren't what you want them to be, or this process of just being able to talk about what happened, or just this decision that I made took a long time. And I mean, I can't even say that it's long, because that kind of sounds judgmental of myself, because I am glad that I gave myself that time to process and think about everything. I came out with a lot of goodies that I want to share too, because the slogan I had for my clothing brand, there's positives and negatives to life. And now we're going to talk about some positives. So, particularly to social media, I learned to use it as a tool and not to use it as any sort of defining point. I listened to Creative Pep Talk, and the host talks about how we kind of use social media as a meter of our growth, or how much we're achieving in life. And in life, we could be doing a lot of things, but if social media is slow, we'll automatically think that that is kind of the barometer of how we're going about our creative journeys or whatever you're doing. So I think just realizing that Instagram is really only 10% of life. Life is pretty much the 90%, and Instagram could be less than that. That's actually a quote that I read in an article that kind of launched me into evaluating how I use social media so that it could benefit me. I just remember going on Instagram every day when I was running my clothing brand and seeing the statistics and the likes, and always wishing there was more, and never thinking that what I posted could reach the goals that I was setting. I couldn't just take a step away and see all the good that was happening, all the things I was learning, all the progress that I'd made, because Instagram was kind of there as the barometer of it all, and it's not. That's why I just want to tell you it's a tool, and just use it as a tool and nothing else. When I say use it as a tool, like, don't take it personally, because we don't look at tools personally. And I do think technology is a tool, because at one point I did think I'd want to go in life without technology, but really that's kind of impossible, because how could I record this podcast? Or we interact with technology whether we like it or not, so might as well see it as a tool to be able to do things that we can provide for ourselves. So right now I use social media sort of as a journal and a backup for photos or thoughts that I have that I want to remember one day, because that's also another thing. While I was working on my brand, I put all my things onto this one hard drive, and that hard drive broke down and all those things got lost. So now I try to put my info in different places just in case something like that happens again. So I'm sort of using Instagram as this tool of one way of saving things, such as photos or memories. Another thing to remember about social media is, of course, we want to post and share things, but know the reason why you're posting that thing or the intention behind that post. Like, if you just want to post it because you felt really happy that day, like, know that you felt super happy that day, and that's all that matters. But just know that you're happy that day, and that's the most important thing. And then posting it is secondary, of course. But I think just remembering that it's secondary and that happiness was the thing you want to remember or appreciate, that's the best way to go about it. And that leads into this question of asking yourself, what are you using it for? So I asked myself that, and I use it as a backup for my photos and thoughts that I want to share whenever I do post, or to promote something that I'm working on, or just to share my creative projects that I'm working on, because I think it is good to put out what you feel comfortable in any capacity, whether it be sending it to your friends or using social media to post it. Another question is, what else can you be doing in X amount of hours that you've been spending on social media? And you could see this in your phone, how many hours, which it's a little brutal if you haven't paid attention to how much you use your phone, but I think it's also super helpful. When I was on Instagram, I think I'd be on my phone way more often. I think I was using my phone maybe 5 hours on average, but sometimes it'd be 7 hours, and I just think to myself what I could be doing in that amount of hours, which is a good chunk. And then that goes into just like reflecting what you really want to do with your time, which I know is a big thing on its own too, but it's also a really cool opportunity to realize what you want to learn or what you want to focus more of your time on. So if you need a journaling prompt, I think that's a really good place to start. And the last thing I would like to remind you is everyone has their own journey, and on Instagram sometimes it's really hard to remember that we all have our own journeys, but I really want to be a reminder that it's a highlight role. And even when I had my brand, I was trying to be as transparent as possible, but of course transparency only goes so far. Like, you don't see the ups and downs and the sad parts of like waking up in the morning and not seeing an order. Like, no one wants to post that, like just remember that people can be putting in work into whatever they're doing, or people are going through other things that they're not posting about. And I hope this podcast can be a reminder of encouragement in any way or inspiration, and to tap into that vulnerability, because I think through vulnerability there's a lot of gratitude, and vulnerability is a whole other topic. I'm also thinking about some topics to talk about on the podcast. I definitely want to talk about therapy, and I'm in the process of writing an episode about fear because I have several quotes and topics that I want to talk about. Last week I mentioned a book that I was reading or started reading, which is called The 9 Dimensions: Unveiling the Laws of Eternity. I'm just going to read some notes that I wrote, and honestly, when I read this book, I think it's just good to read with an open mind. Don't take everything right off the bat. And it's definitely a spiritual book. It talks about, like it says, the dimensions. Like there's the astral realm, which is the 4th dimension, which is where heaven is. And then there's the 6th dimension, which is where angels are. This is everything I learned in the book. The author is pretty much talking about the process of what it's like once our physical form has passed and our soul gets separated from that physical form and then goes into these other dimensions. So if you're interested in reading something like that, then I think this would be a really good book, because the author is quite detailed about what they think that process is. I think it's also important to read new things, but you don't have to actually take it for yourself. Like, I think it's interesting, but I don't know if I'll take this info and really believe in it. The author explains what the other world is, which is where all these dimensions are. I really do like this topic that the author says it's materialistic to think that we just have this life on earth and that there's no more after we pass, and that we're always on this ongoing improvement of our soul, and that life doesn't end and you're always learning to kind of grow your soul. And it just made me feel not attached to materialistic things or worldly things, or just not to be attached. And the author says this physical form we're in is an ongoing process of growth and evolution. So our souls and our bodies now are just a part of the process, that it didn't just start once we were born. There was already a process before that, and this is just a part of the process, and that it doesn't end once life ends. It's just going to keep going. And I've read some other, well, you can call them self-help or spiritual books, and they all sort of talk about very similar themes, where, especially for that topic, where our life now is just a big part of something that's never ending. So I will make another episode about books that I've read, because I do have about 7 or 8 books that really helped me develop ideas or ideals of life, and that I incorporate into my life too, that have helped a lot with just viewing life. Because I think, especially as I grow in my 20s, and especially now too, I'm letting go of values or ideas that I portrayed onto life, that maybe when I was a teenager I sort of thought being in your 20s was a certain way. I feel like these books just help me develop, along with life experiences, of how to view life currently. Not that that's going to be set forever, but kind of having some idea, which is nice, but also being open to continue to develop. So that's one way that I like to close the podcast, is kind of reflecting on a book that I read. Or I can also share some cool things that I found on the internet, which I don't want to create a newsletter or just say them on the podcast. So let me know which one you like. Do you like kind of the book reflection, or I can share cool things that I found on the internet, or both? And you can let me know through Instagram by messaging me, or I'll put a poll up, or you can email me, which is cool. Like a little digital handwritten letter. Thank you for listening to the second episode of Be with Marisa Lee. Be sure to listen to it on all streaming platforms, and there'll be a YouTube video with subtitles and also a transcription to read. Thank you to my editor, Caitlin, who is helping me with the production of my podcast episodes. And thank you for listening. If you have any topics that you want to hear about, please email me or message me on Instagram. We will talk soon.